Hello, everyone. I'm Gwen Schlicta, and I'm going to talk about beyond the classroom. So I'm going to talk about two things. I'm going to talk about a butterfly cure that we're doing up in Edmonds, connected with University of Washington. And then I'm also going to talk about fostering inclusivity with external validation and how that might promote underrepresented populations in research in general, and how this can promote that. So the first thing, like I said, is that we're going to talk about this butterfly lab cure that I've been working on with Lauren Buckley, who's actually going to be following me in the talks. And this is particularly focused on the sort of broader impacts of a research project that's going on at the University of Washington. So many of you, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but most of you are aware that there's sort of the traditional types of research experiences that students can have, and those are generally in internships. They are incredibly high impact, but they tend to be very limited in the number of people that they reach. And then we can go towards this idea of course-based undergraduate research experiences, and those can be potentially high impact, but they can reach a much broader range of people. And that is important in terms of accessibility for reaching all types of students and getting them interested in research. There's an abundance of evidence on the benefit of cures. I'm not really going to talk about that because I think there's a lot out there, and people are going to talk about that probably on Wednesday. And there's evidence also that cures may also support more diversity in research. So we know that from the research, at least thus far, that these UREs, or undergraduate research experiences, can enhance STEM persistence. They can improve retention because they're getting real-world connections to the research, and it can correlate to improved STEM persistence, and we see that in quite a few studies thus far. It also has a positive psychological effect in terms of how you identify yourself as a scientist, your scientific identity, promoting STEM persistence. And I was really struck when I came across this paper. I had already been starting to develop this cure and thinking about this cure, and I came across this paper on achieving STEM diversity and about fixing the classrooms, and that outdated teaching methods amount to discrimination. And I was looking at what it said in the literature about that, and one of the things that popped out to me was this idea of one well-run cure taken early in college increases student persistence. And as I think we've already mentioned before, when we talk about community colleges, we're talking about that early time, right? We already have talked about the fact that a huge number of our potential STEM students are coming from community colleges, that if we're not catching them at the community college level, we may have already lost them by the time that you get to the university. So by the time they transfer, they've already been disillusioned in STEM courses. They've already don't feel like a scientist. That's those people, and those are not us. So if we don't address that early on in the game, we may already be losing that persistence that we're trying. And we have very little STEM persistence overall at community colleges, right? So our persistence in STEM is low in general, and then if they're transferring, we may have already lost them as students. So what we were moving towards with my work with Lauren Buckley at University of Washington was the idea of kind of creating a bridge, not just doing the cure in my classroom and in my lab, but also connecting that to the research community that's going on at University of Washington, doing that research and connecting my students to R1 research experiences, and also to the people, the community that's associated with R1 research. And so this is this idea of moving towards more collaborative cure. And I know we've talked about this already. We've mentioned this. But this is kind of the focus that we were looking at. And so this research, and I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the research, that's really something that Lauren will talk about at least a little bit, is that it focuses on the impacts of climate change. And students really are doing research in the classroom associated with that, or I should say in the laboratory. We have a butterfly lab at Edmonds College that sort of mimics what they're doing at the University of Washington laboratory. So what's really cool is when they walk into University of Washington laboratory, they already have knowledge of the system. They're already little experts on the system, right? Because they've done a lot of the work that's involved with working in the lab, in the Buckley lab. They get community involvement through service learning, so they're doing a lot of collecting and educating the public about climate change, and they have this direct connection to the scientific community at University of Washington. What's really cool is people from the Buckley lab at University of Washington, including Lauren, will come on over to our lab. They'll interact with them through the process, ask them questions about their research, give them feedback about their research, and then they come and represent at the symposium. So these are direct connections associated with the scientific community at UW. So this is all associated with a specific NSF grant for organismal response to climate change. That is something that Lauren is the lead, or Dr. Buckley, I should say, is the lead of. This is what we call the WARP project. We're not warped, just our butterflies, I suppose. But this is the Washington Resurvey of the Pierre Project. And this was a project that I got involved with working with Dr. Buckley, because I was one of the original people on this project 25 years ago doing this research, not being in charge of this research, but rather the one running around catching butterflies and running the experiment. So I have this deep connection to these butterflies. So what we're focusing on in this particular research is that we're focusing on this connection where we partner and we extend the types of feasible experiments. So through this grant, we were able to get facilities that make it possible for us to do research on climate change. You need environmental chambers. You need certain types of machinery that we cannot get any other way, and we do not have the facilities for. And we were talking earlier about things like, access when we talk about community colleges. We don't even have access to good papers. If it's not open resource, it's very, very hard for us to even get access to journals. And so we've been talking a long time about just the simple fact of why, as community colleges, don't we all have access to the literature? That should be something that shouldn't be, we talk about open resource, that's something that shouldn't be just for the people who are at universities, right? But this is something that I have access to through this grant, and so now this means that I have that access for my students as well. It also exposes our students to these current research that's going on. So they're reading what's coming out of that lab. They're reading many of the same papers that the lab is reading. They're interacting with that community. They know what's going on. They may be attending local symposia, et cetera. So they're really involved with this community. And and as we just had our symposium this last Friday, and Dr. Buckley went around and talked to each of those people who had their posters at this symposium that we have, that this is a symposium we invite people from all over the community. We'd love people from Allen Institute to come to our symposium. And they can go around and then talk to our students and the research that they're doing. So the majority of our students actually transfer to University of Washington. And so the idea behind it is that if they have these experiences at Edmonds College, when they transfer, they feel so much more comfortable with the fact that they're doing research there, they already know the lab there, they have increased confidence and familiarity with the experience that they're having at University of Washington. Like I said, the majority of Edmonds students transfer to University of Washington. So these are some of the things that they connect. I've already mentioned a lot of these. People visit Edmonds College and come and talk to our students as they're conducting their research. They give us feedback. They tell us about the experiences they had and tell the students, like, I had this same experience, or I had this failure, or I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So they're connecting with these students and saying, this path, it's totally obtainable for you, because I was there too. And some of our people in the Buckley lab at University of Washington come from community colleges. So this gives them representation that this is an obtainable thing for them to achieve. They discuss these projects. They attend symposia that we have every year, and they offer opportunities. So this grant funds opportunities for these students. At least 2 Edmonds College students are going to go to these opportunities to continue their research. So they already have research experience, but they can do internships or they can get research opportunity, volunteer opportunities to work in the lab. And so these are important because it allows for these experiences in the research process, which include, like I said, presenting their research, working on potential publications, or participating in one of these different types of longer-term research experiences. So I was just going to play really quick. One of our first people who went through this program and ended up working in the Buckley lab, Jennifer Lopez, and this is just a quick 1-minute spiel that she has here.
The Edmonds biology department was like really crucial to my success, I would say. Everyone fostered a very supportive environment. They gave a lot of mentorship. They were all very approachable. And the content that I learned from the biology department was just excellent. It really helps like now that I'm at UW to like reflect upon the skills that I was taught at Edmonds. Cabbage White Butterfly Lab here in Edmonds like led me to rediscover and really like fuel and solidify my passion for biology, and that it gave me the skills that I needed to have to be a resilient scientist and a resilient like biologist in general. And also like when you go to University of Washington, you have to do like an application for your major, which I did the molecular cellular developmental bio, and I also talked about research there. And the fact that I was introduced by Dr. Gwen to Dr. Buckley and was able to participate in like field research really helped, I think, give me an edge to get into the biology major itself.
Okay. Now it doesn't want me to advance. Hold on. It's throwing me double lights. Something I did. I did. It doesn't move anything. All right, I'm going to keep talking. So, this is this particular situation where we have Jennifer is one of our first people who went through the program, and this just shows you an example of how she felt supported by that, and there are many, many other instances that she talked about where she felt imposter syndrome, and going through this process helped her overcome this idea of imposter syndrome that she had when she transferred. Is it going now? Okay, no. There we go. So bridges were brought up, right? Sam Donovan brought up bridges. This is another example of a bridge, right? This is our bridge. This is our Mount Lake Bridge. This is, if you're a Seattleite, you know this bridge well because you often sit on it for very long periods of time. And so this is this idea of this bridge between these two, this collaboration. I'm going to continue to talk about this idea of fostering inclusivity associated with external validation in my last few minutes here, is that for lack of time, I don't want to necessarily have this conversation with all of us, but I'd like you to think for a second about the types of experiences or events that you had in your life that really solidified or made you feel like a scientist or a researcher or a professional in your field. So if you think about those experiences, a lot of them are associated with external validation. Right? You presented at a meeting, or you had a mentor say, wow, that was an awesome project. Something associated with external validation. But we generally tend to have that missing from our cures. We do our cures in a classroom. We present to fellow students. Yeah, that's external validation, but it's really not external to the class. And so when we think about these types of external validations, even with collaboration, in a cure, it's among students, it's among teaching assistants, it's within the classroom. In an internship, it tends to start to broaden outside of the classroom. And there's importance in that. And I really want to emphasize the importance in that. So we have this classic scientific method. This is just pulled off the web, right? And then I'm going to bring the one up again that Sam brought up, right? This idea that we have this much more complicated picture here. But most importantly to me, we have that part of it, community analysis and feedback. And I really think we're missing that from the types of cures that we're doing most of the time, because they're all internal, right? Unless you're presenting at a symposium, you're going out and you're presenting at University of Washington's big undergraduate symposium and it's outside of your department, you're not really getting that community feedback. And so cures are great, but what's really missing is that external validation. And yeah, sure, not all cures are the same, but that shared understanding of research is that we need that component from our community, right? And so we often are missing that validation piece. So how can we add that back in? So the way that we can add that back in is this idea of external validation. And there are many different types of external validation, and we can link those experiences to our cures and have a much more positive impact. And so those can be all sorts of things. Presenting at the meeting we've already talked about, but I'll briefly talk about badging and micro-credentials, service learning, and then of course what we're already doing with the Buckley Lab is this idea of collaborations. But not everybody can do collaborations, right? It might not be possible for everybody. So there are other ways to do external this external validation. So Symposium, this is just a picture of our symposium that was just held on Friday here, where we have quite a large symposium this year. We had 120 posters, so we're getting bigger and bigger every year. Service learning, you can link some sort of service learning associated where students go out in the community and they are the expert on the topic, which is great for community. And there's already studies that show that for a lot of minoritized students, sometimes the community stuff is more valuable to them and more validating to them than something like going and presenting at a symposium. There is this movement towards badging, which means these competencies that we were talking about can be badges that they earn by going and taking certain courses. And you can have these badges stackable. These badges, going back to what Sam was talking about earlier, can align to vision and change core competencies if you want them to. And these badges, just like Duolingo, where everybody's like, oh my gosh, I can't let my streak die. I got to keep going. These are not that different, right? You get these badges, you move on, and then they can stack to a micro-credential in undergraduate research. And then last but not least is this sort of ultimate kind of goal, which would be wonderful for everybody to achieve, which is EC cures, or external collaboration cures, which once again, aren't always easily obtainable, but perhaps we can find a way to make those externally, or make those obtainable for more people. So this is just, once again, Jennifer Lopez's story here and associated with our external collaboration with the Buckley Lab. So I'm proposing that we have this sort of continuum of cures, right? We start out with this assignment-based. We're trying to get towards that. We can move towards a project-based. Most of us who are doing cures have some sort of project-based. Takes a couple of weeks, 5 weeks. We just heard a great example of a project-based cure. But then we can start to move towards this external validation cure, right? Where you're getting something outside of the classroom. You're doing one other thing, right? And then the sort of gold standard to try to move towards, if that's possible in your particular case, is some sort of external validation or external collaboration where you're making a bridge to some of the universities that maybe students are planning on going to. There are specific benefits already demonstrated by collaboration. There was one paper that came out that specifically looked at the value of external collaboration. But the benefits of these kind of things still remain unclear, once again, because community colleges weren't very highly represented in that sample. So we don't really know how much of an impact potentially it could be. So we got a grant, my colleague Mary Whitfield and I got a grant to look at the effects of this external validation. So we're trying to measure to see, does it really have an impact? If you just do service learning, is that enough? Or if you just presented a symposium, is that enough? Or is it the biggest impact if you do an external collaboration? What kind of impact do each of these have by themselves and collaboratively? So we're trying to measure that. We've run a cure workshop to try to increase the number of cures at our school. We have our first new cure cohort that went through this year. We've increased our cure, I think, 8 more courses, which was pretty big for us, right? Including ones in math and social sciences. We've done TIMSS surveys and focus groups that are actually happening today to see how the impact of that, and we're going to analyze our first year of data this summer so that we can give you some, hopefully the next time we see you, some information associated with the value of this. Last but not least, I'm sorry I'm already running over so there won't be time for questions, but one of the things that I've been thinking about as you all just talking about where we talk about open education resources, to me one of the best resources would be some sort of model out there, some sort of way that people can connect. I don't really feel like if you ask anybody, they would say, well, I don't know how to find a collaborator. I don't know where to look. I don't know anyone at University of Minnesota or Washington or whatever. So I think that could be something also that's some sort of open resource associated with connecting people. And maybe it's already out there and I just don't know about it. But these kinds of things would be really beneficial to increasing the access of this external validation to all different CURE programs. And with that, sorry I went over here. These are all the lovely people that are involved in this project, and thank you so much for your attention.